welcome to those who are joining in. Just a note for those who are watching the video afterwards, we'll bring all our attendees in and then we'll get started.
Hi, Ronnie. Welcome.
Thanks, Joel. Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. Do you want me to start, Joe?
No, Brooke runs the meeting. We're
Okay.
waiting on attendees, so we'll wait for Brooke. He's our chair. Okay.
Got it.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll do introductions and so on. So just hang
Okay.
on for a sec.
No worries.
Thanks for being with us.
I'm glad to be here.
Give it another minute or so and then get started. Well, it doesn't look like we've had anyone else join in for a while, so we will get started. I will begin by calling this board workshop of the South Woodbury School District to order and move on directly to the land acknowledgement with Marnie Jackson.
Thank you. Pardon me. South Woodbury School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, originally known as Chacoliche in the Shutzid of the coastal Salish peoples, on the lands of the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial, and have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. Please join us in expressing our deep respect and gratitude to the Indigenous people of this territory for their enduring care and protection of the land on which we currently occupy and share through the Treaty of Point Elliott, signed by 82 tribes in Mukilteo on January 22nd, 1855. And if I may add a word as a personal note about the meaning for me of that land acknowledgement, I'll say that I learned so much more about the Treaty of Point Elliott when I visited the Hebulb Cultural Center, which is a Tulalip Tribes Resource Center. And so I highly recommend it as we reopen and as facilities become once again available for the public as a resource to explore with our families and children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marty. That's a fantastic cue for us to follow along to learn more about that. As this is a board workshop, I'll begin briefly by talking about what that means, and then we'll get on to the presentations. So we have two types of meetings in public in the school board. We have our business meetings like the last one and the next one, and then we have our board workshops. At the board workshops are really our opportunity to dig in depth into a particular topic and discuss it not only between ourselves, but also with the community. They're actually the meetings that I look forward to the most because I really love those conversations with the community and just talking about things before we're without worrying about getting through Robert's Rules of Order in a specific style. We will be taking public comment, obviously, through the Q&A forum. All public comment must be accompanied by name and location. Just the general area, Freeland, Clinton, Langley, Coopville, whatever, is perfectly fine. I will not read anonymous comments. I will also not read comments that are not on the topic, because these are specific to discussing the topic at hand. We're going to keep to those rules. The business meetings, the public comment section of those is your time to talk to us about something that's not on an agenda. Also need to let folks know that we will be going into an executive session at the end of this meeting, which will be to review the progress of negotiations with our local unions and review the performance of an employee. With the procedure out of the way, you've heard me talk a lot about how I'm a numbers nerd, that I love looking at numbers and data. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Ronnie Rumsey. Please let me know if I've mispronounced that, to the board meeting. And if you could tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you can let us know about, that would be fantastic. You're on mute.
There we go. I'm so not used to muting, so if I get stuck, just tell me. I'm good with that. My name is Ronnie Rumsey. I'm from the Center for Educational Effectiveness. I'm the Director of Professional Learning there. And I've been with the company 4 years. I'm beginning my 5th year with the company, but in actuality, I'm 25 years with the company, because in my previous position as an elementary principal, as a Director of Teaching and Learning person, I was directly involved on the other side of the data. So I began in 2000. The company started in, it's 21 years old now. The company started back in the time when there were school improvement grants, and they were pretty large grants that the state awarded. They invited you to apply, and the way you got invited to apply was you were on the bottom of the list. So it was nice to be able to make some changes that we were able to make. But one of the requirements was that we use this data around climate and culture in our buildings. And so that's where I started to get involved with it. I learned the first 2 or 3 years, I just put it on the shelf because I didn't know what to do with it. And then I finally went, if they're having us do this, there must be something to this. So that's when I started digging into the data, and then some of the elements around climate and culture and trust and relationships in buildings. So that's kind of who I am. So do you want me to keep going?
Well, thank you for that.
Okay.
We very much appreciate you coming to join us, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the latest polling data and results and all of that from South Whitby.
Great, thank you. So what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to keep me on track. So one of the things I'm going to ask you as we get going, if you have a question, just interrupt me. Don't raise your hand because I won't see it. I know for me, I just keep talking. So I'd rather that you ask me right when you have it so that we can clarify and then answer any questions you might have. I am not a numbers person, or at least I wasn't a numbers person until I learned how to actually use data and how data affects us on a regular basis. So what I found was, you know, in my beginning to work with buildings and districts and things was climate and culture is the bedrock of student achievement. And without a positive climate and culture within a building or a district, some of the initiatives that you may be trying to forward in your district or in any district, they have a rough time going because there just isn't that trust amongst the adults and things. So, so that, to me, that was really fascinating. So I've done some work around that. One of the people that I do a lot of reading is Brick is his name. And one of the comments that he makes is that relationships are at the core of successful learning communities as well as student success. And it's not just the relationship between the student and the teacher, but it's a relationship between teacher, staff, teacher, custodian, teacher, parent, parent, teacher. It's that whole reciprocal process that goes on that are at the heart of what we do. So as we talk tonight, I'm going to put you to work digging in the data. So you're going to get your hands dirty in the data. I can promise you, you're just going to get started. I'm going to say time's up. Let's move on, because we don't have a lot of time to dig in the data. We will just look at staff data tonight. You do have parent and student reports to look at as well, but we're just going to dig into staff due to time restraints.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Just to give you a little background, this is the research that we pulled all of our information and developed our surveys from. So it's not just some questions that we made up, but we actually dug into the research and went in and said, what is there about organizational trust that we need to know, that we need to include? It actually started, a lot of the work started right here with this characteristics of high performing schools, which is a research study out of the University of Washington. And I believe it was 2000, right around 2000, because we used that to begin the EES data. So I had the opportunity to work with your leadership team yesterday. They were delightful. They were fun to work with. They had great questions. They dug in. And one of the pieces that we really stress, that I really stress as I'm working with them, and it's really hard, is solutionitis can become a pandemic when you're thinking about data, because you can jump into solutions before you actually get all of your information. So when I say that, it's my experience has been, I would look at the data, I would make up my mind that the data meant something with one data point. And then I would never ask any more questions in order to be able to move me forward in the right direction. So what I found as a building principle was, oh my gosh, I've wasted a lot of time because I made that decision on one data point and went this way. And if I would have had 2 or 3 data points, we would have gone this way. So tonight, as you dig into the data, I'm going to really encourage you not to jump to solutionitis. And the biggest one that people are jumping to right now is it's because of COVID. These results are because of COVID. They could be, but they might not be. So as you think about the work that we're doing tonight, I'm going to ask you to think about what other data do you need? What other information do you need in order to be making some decisions around what you're doing in South Woodby School District? One of the questions I gave to the administrators, and I'll give it to you as well, is what does a person need to see, hear, or experience in order to respond in a more positive way? That frees everybody up from going, oh my God, they want to know why I answered it that way. If I tell them I was one of the negative ones, I'm going to get in trouble. It takes that risk all out of it. And anybody can answer, anybody can say, and some people need to experience things more than they need to hear them. Some people need to see them more than they need to hear them. So this opens that up for them. And you can save a lot of time with this one little question, using it exactly like this. My example that I gave to the administrators is I work with a building in Ferndale. And we're going to talk about the I versus they gap in just a minute. But one of the things with the I versus they gap is we want it to be less than a certain percentage, like 20%, the gap less than 20%. Their gap was 70%. So they had quite a ways to go around this particular question. I think the question was, I'm open to new ideas and my colleagues are open to new ideas. So the staff didn't really feel like their colleagues were open to new ideas. When we sat down, before we asked this question, I asked their leadership team, what are some of your thoughts around that question? It's because of this, it's because of this, it's because of this. So we did just kind of like a little action research to find out, okay, this is what they think it is. We're going to go ask this question and find out. They had things like it was a new curriculum that we had. It was my neighbors not following the pacing chart, a bunch of different things. The answer was, it was about the conversations they were having in the staff room. So the tweak that they had to do was set some norms up for the kind of conversations they had in the staff room. And they were able to move forward and drop that gap 50%. the next year. So that's why I say digging in and getting more data, having discussions. We're just going to have some discussion starters tonight. And then after I'm gone, you get to carry on those conversations. One of the things I want to talk to you about a little bit is the way I look at data, the way we look at data in the office. This is just a regular 5-point Likert scale. If you think about Likert 1, the way we do it, a 1 is the least positive and a 5 is the most positive. This 3 right here is a fence sitter. We call them a neutral. So when you're looking at your data tonight, I'm going to say positive responses. That's talking about these 2 darkest blue, the almost always true and the often true. When I talk about the negative responses, we're going to talk about that's the almost never true and seldom true. We're going to just combine those together. This is where I want you to spend your time, because this is the area where you can impact change within your district. You have some places where you've got a lot of runway to run with as far as the neutrals go. That's just a person who needs to see her or experience more of something. They don't see it enough to be able to say, I see it over on the positive side. So it's kind of like that 80-20 rule. You work with the 80% who are ready to move, and you hope that the other 20% will come along. So that's actually what we're going to be looking at and working with here. So any questions about anything so far? Okay.
For me, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Oh, good. I can tell them in the office today, they said I made sense. So that's good. I'm just kidding. This is one of the questions that we're going to dig into right away. This is the question about conflict, because conflict in the I versus they pieces, those are the 2 pieces where if that gap is big enough, you don't go any further. Stop, don't pass go, don't go to high standards and expectations, don't go to monitoring of teaching and learning. This, you must spend some time here, okay? So when I look at this, when you look at your reports, you're gonna, I'm gonna have you look at in just a minute. This is where you can see there's quite a large gap in the neutral here for this. And this isn't your data. So this is just canned data that I'm just talking to you about. There's quite a large neutral here, and it's just the certificated staff. We've broken, so we break it out for you so you can see, is it a certificated staff? Is it an other staff, which is usually your classified staff, who are having the issue? Because sometimes we find that this number up here gets skewed by the classified staff. If there's some things going on, maybe there are negotiations that's not going well. Maybe there are some things where they don't feel valued in the building that they're in or the district because they haven't been included in professional development. There's all kinds of different ways sometimes that they can actually skew your data, and it actually helps you to go, okay, we need to put some training in place for them. They're feeling left out. They really want to be part of this, and we haven't checked on that yet. So that's one of the pages we're going to look at in the reports. The other one, this is the I versus they gap, and I pulled this right out of the current report that you should have for the district. But I didn't pull this one, but we're going to look at yours. But this comes out of the current report. Go ahead.
A moment. I just wanted to note that I saw a hand up from an attendee, and I want to note that please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will jump in and read them when they come in. Thank you.
Yep. So I can look here and I can see the gap, and let me explain how we the formula for figuring out what the gap is. We take the positive responses and we subtract the negative responses and the neutral responses for the gap. Okay, so it's just not the positive versus the negative, but we've slid the neutral down, because if you don't use them, if we don't move that gap doesn't go down. We don't decrease that gap. So that's the formula for how we figure that out. You can see here the gap amongst, it's 26%, but when we break it out, the gap in your certificate, in this particular building certificated staff, is 36%. when you look at your longitudinal report, you'll see a report that looks like this. This is the same question, but it's over time. So you will have 2 years of data now. I just want to caution you, you don't have a trend yet. You just have 2 data points. So before we start saying we've got a trend that's going down, we want to wait at least another year before we say that that's trend data. But we can look over the last 2 years and see, okay, look, they did something pretty awesome. They dropped that gap 16% within that building. And for this question, I welcome new ideas and change. They dropped it 12%. So those are celebrations that as board, as building administrators, as district administrators, you would want to celebrate. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put you to work, and you should have longitudinal reports. And let me just slide those over so you can see those, what they look like. They should be orange. For some reason, I'm not getting my thing to slide here. I lost it now.
And Ronnie, I forwarded the reports to the board so that they have them in their
Perfect.
emails by building, just like
Okay.
the administrators had them.
Okay, you will only need the district reports tonight. I mean, that's probably all we'll have time to go through. I do encourage you to go through the building reports as well, but tonight, just for time's sake, start with the district reports, and then if we have extra time, you can go dig into the building reports. Just a little clue for you. All of the staff reports are this orange color. Students are blue, and the parents are kind of that green olive color. So all we're going to use tonight is the orange colored ones. I know this is not the longitudinal one because it only has 1 year on it. So where did it go? Let me find the longitudinal, and I'll just show you what pages we're going to look at. Here it is.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything except the presentation.
Oh, thanks for telling me that. I appreciate that. Now, do you see the report?
It just flickered, but went back to the presentation.
Okay, fine. I'd have this problem quite often, so you'd think I would learn this by now.
Yeah, sometimes it only shares one program.
Screen, there it is. Okay, now you should be able to see it, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for letting me know that. I was telling them yesterday, I've sat through presentations and not shared my screen for a good 5 minutes before anybody said anything. So I was like, okay, so this is just the cover. You're gonna look on the longitudinal at pages 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, and we're gonna spend about 10 minutes digging in. And what I want you to do is to find some celebrations. Okay, so those are things that as a board you would want to celebrate to be able to include. Opportunities. Sometimes people call those challenges, but I call them opportunities because it gives us a chance to have more discussion, collect more data, find out what people are thinking. And then is there an item or two in there that you need more information about? Okay, so we're just you're gonna be able to work on your own for about 5, let's see, probably about 8 minutes. So until, well, 8 minutes. And then we'll come back together and we'll have some discussion. Okay, is that clear? Does everybody know where to find their reports?
It's in your email, the email right from me. It has all the district-wide data reports, and you want them to look at staff, correct?
Staff longitudinal.
Yeah.
Okay, it's labeled that way. If you open, you have to click on the one file I sent you, and then it'll open all the others.
Yeah. So you want us to look at the ones that have that.
The one that has that front page for staff. Yep.
And the ones with the slanted lines showing
Yes.
where we've moved. Yeah.
The cover will have 2 years on it. So you'll be able to see the end count for the 2 different years. Okay, so I'll bring you back in about 8 minutes.
Joe, I'm getting, there was an error processing the page when I tried to open it. Am I the only one getting that?
I successfully downloaded and opened the most recent attachment from Joe's email.
Okay, I'll try again.
You have to download it first, Andrea.
I did that. Still, it just wasn't happy, but we'll see. We try again. Sometimes it works.
So we have 1 minute before we're going to come back together and share what you guys have figured out.
And as we prepare to share, I will note for those following along at home that if you have comments, ideas, thoughts, questions, please drop them into the Q&A box and I will read them into the meeting.
Okay. So what celebrations did you find? And then what opportunities and what do you want to know more about?
I could begin if that's all right.
Perfect.
I thought I saw a number of things that I felt like celebrating. I don't know. I'm new at analyzing this type of data in this presentation, so correct me if I shouldn't be celebrating. But I thought that there was significant improvement demonstrated in a feeling among staff that we can talk about how to solve problems. And I also felt that there was an improvement in sensing a willingness to address conflict and a reduction in the I-they gap around openness to new ideas. So I thought the data pointed to some improvement year to year in all three of those areas.
I think what I noticed in knowing, being on the board prior to us starting the CEE survey, having gone through now 2 years of that data, one of the things that I'm noticing that I want to celebrate is the areas that we've pulled out to focus intensely on, namely communication, building expectations, the dress code, the code of conduct and discipline policies, those kinds of focuses that we've had the last 2 years. I'm seeing growth and I'm seeing positive responses towards. So that's one celebration that I have.
Ew.
Yeah, I see in the I-they perspectives, the I versus they, I see a nice celebration down there at the bottom where it feels like a level of trust is continuing to be built between colleagues, between staff members. And that was a huge ask this year during COVID.
Mhm.
And so, whether COVID skewed the numbers or not, we asked a lot of our staffs as a whole and as individuals because they were doing it by themselves in their houses for part of the year.
Mhm.
And so that speaks a lot to how our staff is communicating with each other.
Great, thanks.
I agree. I thought that those, in particular, the welcome new ideas and change, that I-they gap, the narrowing there was impressive, but still left room for, left opportunity there with the middle responses. With that, we talk about how we solve, how to solve it, less of that opportunity there, but also even more growth.
And talking about opportunities, I see an opportunity to really understand what accountability means, because I noticed that there is still some sense among some staff that colleagues aren't willing to be or are seldom willing to be held accountable for student learning. And I thought accountability is a term that we use a lot today, and I'm not sure that there's a really shared sense around what it means and whether it's safe to be held accountable and to hold one another accountable and to receive constructive feedback that invites us forward. And so I just think maybe as a district, there's an opportunity to kind of create a culture where accountability is embraced and celebrated rather than, I don't know, treated as a concern.
I think that's really important, that definition of terms.
Yes.
What does accountability really mean? And what does responsibility to colleagues really look like? I like that as an extended, construct around this data.
And that's perfect, because that's exactly what I was going to say. One of the things we talked about yesterday with the administrative team was asking how they interpreted the item. What does accountability mean? Because to me, it may mean something totally different than what it does to you. So if we don't all have that common vocabulary and the common definition around the vocabulary, that's where some of this neutral or I don't trust my colleague may seem to be, but it could be around the definition of a term as well.
Mhm.
The other piece I would tell you with that particular one is when you look at PLC work, if you're doing PLCs, and when you do PLCs, if your norms are set up and you're really, really driving your PLCs around student data, you should see that accountability gap shrink. That one there where my colleagues are willing to be held accountable. So that would be a place where you think about, okay, how are our PLCs running? How are we supporting them as as the governing body? How do we support that PLC work so that we can get to the point where everybody's feeling like everybody else is accountable? So great. Damien, did you have anything you wanted to share?
No, I'm good. I'm going to need more time to look at this on a bigger screen for me. But of course, and I don't want to ruin the positives here because some of those negatives jump out a little bit bigger at me. But I'd rather see them in a bigger screen than the little one I'm looking at. But thank you. This is great.
Yes, you're welcome. I totally get that because mine's on a big screen over here. So that's kind of where I work with the data is like big. So I get it.
Ronnie, may I ask one question before we move on?
Yes,
I'm
of
just
course.
curious. I noticed a note on page 3 that indicates that the gap of 20% or 25% indicates a need to investigate. And I'm curious, when the gap is below that threshold, let's say it's a gap of 15 or 20%, it still seems that there's room to improve. Is that threshold just sort of an arbitrary red flag for people to look at, or?
No, we actually set that threshold looking at our data around highly effective schools and the ones that are making progress. And that's where that number played out is at secondary. If it's at 25%, you're usually good to go. You can dig into some of those other, it's a little easier to move the needle than it is if it's above 25%. Same with the elementary. There's just a different personality between elementaries and secondaries. And I think that plays into that number needing to be a little lower for elementaries. So that's where that comes from. We didn't, it's not a throw the dart at the dartboard,
Sure.
but yeah, we've found
Data
that to be,
based.
yep.
Ronnie,
Yep.
it
Right.
reminds me a little bit of when we roll out positive behavior interventions and supports into buildings, we aim for a target of 80% of the staff being on board with the change. And it's kind of that rule of thumb that if you have 80% of the staff willing to move in that direction, that you can make that meaningful progress. And so I'm wondering if that number has to do with kind of that similar moving as a collective whole, but also honoring and recognizing that not everybody's going to be uniform.
It could, I mean, that could play into it. I just know that we've run the numbers on these two numbers because people ask us this quite often. To make sure that those numbers are still holding, and they've held that in the almost 20 years that I've known about those numbers. So yeah, but it does make sense that there might be a correlation there. So I can't say that that's necessarily the case.
I wasn't trying to imply it's the same, but I'm wondering if it's the same kind of thought process in terms of if you're looking at a system change versus an individual change.
But it could be, but I think, and Ronnie helped me out, but one of the 9 characteristics of high performing schools is where they get this from, right? So
Yes.
when they looked at high performing schools and surveyed them over and over, that 80% or less is where those high performing schools function.
Yes.
And so that's a piece of why they look at it that way. It doesn't mean that you don't want 100%. It means if you're going at 80%, in a good position to be highly effective.
And,
That's helpful, thanks.
and at 80% in a smaller district, that's one of the notes I wrote down as you guys were working. I noticed a couple of things. At 80% with your end count, that's 20 people.
Mhm.
Okay, so that could be one of your elementary buildings. You know, so in smaller districts, you really have to keep that end count in mind because it can be pretty volatile depending on how the numbers shift. So
One way or the other, right? So
Yes,
80%, you could drop to 50% because of one person, but 80%'s again, something that we were not at. These 2
Correct.
years of data, are looking good. Back in 2013, there was quite a gap between, and we haven't carried that data forward because it's too much time in between, too many staff changes. But back then, the they was, I think we had, it was at least a 50% gap.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah, I didn't go back and look. I could have looked, but I didn't even think about it.
yeah, it's just, I mean, totally different staff, totally different time frame, but we've moved a lot forward a lot since then. And our PLCs, that's, you talk about support, just the anecdote of the board supporting early release Wednesdays so that we can engage in
Yep.
not only professional development, but PLCs. I think, I would hope, again, I don't know, but the data would tell me that we're making progress. And I suspect there's a correlation between starting our PLCs and early release Wednesdays and this kind of data.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And to be honest with you, there are celebrations all over the place in your data for your district. So just know that you've been doing a great job in the district. One of the things that I noticed was you've got a lot of good runway here to be able to do some of the initiatives that you may want to do, or beef up the initiatives that you're already working on. Because those people are just waiting to see a little bit more of something. So,
Yeah, that
Brooke,
was the one.
Go ahead.
That was exactly the one that was jumping out at me. Is we've got these situations where people welcome new ideas and change. They think that their colleagues welcome new ideas and change. They want to be held accountable. That they think their colleagues do. And then we have this 39% neutral on sense of urgency. That surprised me and suggested something we might want to investigate to me.
Sure. Yeah, and they say it's sometimes true. So what do we need to do more of to make it so it's more true more often? So I look at it as a good thing. So any questions I need to answer, Brooke, or should I keep going?
There has not been anything that has come in from those watching.
Okay, just quickly, were there any opportunities that you noticed from this data that you want to kind of keep in mind?
Are you referring specifically to this one report or all of the reports collectively?
Well, if you had a chance to look at all of them, that's great. If you didn't, if you just looked at the pages we talked about, either one. So go ahead. Let's talk about celebration or
well,
opportunities.
I think one of the opportunities that's presenting it, and it was really affirming to see the data as we've been talking about next steps and next goals for the district. We've spent a huge amount of time these last few years trying to set more of the culture and communication pieces in motion. And we have been discussing as a team about looking at instruction and looking at how we can continue to honor those cultural changes through instruction and through the approaches that we look at. And so it was really affirming for me to look at the data and see that people were wanting us to start focusing in on the academic standards and focus in on differentiation in instruction and ensuring that all students at all capabilities across the spectrum are having really intentional opportunities to learn. And so that was a really cool opportunity that I was pulling out of the report.
Great. Yeah, that was brought up yesterday as well. So that's good that you guys are seeing some of the same things.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything you needed more information about?
I would say just for our guests who maybe don't know what a PLC is, if you could give that a little tidbit of information.
Professional learning community.
Yes.
And it is a, teachers will use it to meet and to focus in on specific goals and topics. And sometimes you would be collaborating on like common assessments or common sequencing in your lesson planning. Other times you're looking at student intervention data, but it's a core group that have either common grades, common subjects that are coming together to intentionally move students forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Just for our guests at home that may not know what that is. Acronyms.
I hope I translated that out of teacher speak well.
You did. It was great. It's been interesting being from a few different districts, and I would think one had enough acronyms to last forever, and then I go to the next one and they had those plus 50 more, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're terrible in education about that.
Sometimes you have the same acronym, but it depends on what department you're in.
Yeah.
And so they have to translate from special ed to gen ed to EL to high cap.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep moving. One of the items that you received in your folders was called a toolkit. And each building has a toolkit, and you have a district toolkit. When I got to a CEE, they said, Ronnie, you're directly out of the building, out of the field, out of the office from education. What do administrators need? And I said, something that makes it really easy for them to dig in to the data. Because if they've done this survey very long, they have a zillion reports. They have 6 every year that they get. So as an administrator, how can I jump in and not have to go item by item and find which response is the most neutral? Or what are the top 5 neutral? Or which one has the most positive? How about those questions that are the same, that we're looking for the same information from parent, staff, and student? How can we do that so that it's easy? So that's what we've come up with. We add a little bit every year. We take some out sometimes when we go, that's not quite working the way we thought it would. Tonight, we're going to look at some pieces of the toolkit. And if you've jumped in, great. If you haven't, that's okay too. I'm going to walk you through a couple of pages that I feel are the most important. And then I'm going to put you to work digging in the data again. So the ones that I really want you to pay attention to today are the readiness to benefit and the change. And just to give you a heads up, there's no page numbers on these because when I'm in person, I don't always give everybody every page. So look in the bottom left, it will tell you the title of the page if you're confused. It's right there. So you'll have readiness to benefit and change. So there are 2 pages. One will give you a longitudinal look and one will give you just a current look. Conflict is also on a readiness to benefit page, and I'll show you that in just a minute. We've actually given you a little different look at some of the same data. But for me, I really like that look, so it helps me quite a bit. The top 5, bottom 5, you will have that for staff, student, and parent. And what we do on that one is we look at the top 5 positive responses for each group and the bottom 5 positive responses, not the ones that are the most negative, but the ones that are the least positive. Okay, so it won't be the reds, it'll still be the blues. But they're the least amount of positive. So we'll look at that, give you an opportunity to look at that. Common questions are the page where we have taken the questions that we're trying to get at the same idea for each respondent group. So around bullying, we have a question in there that's around bullying for staff, student, and parents. We've lumped those into a construct. so that you can see if there's some differences in perceptions between the groups. And then the last one is called the land of opportunity, and that's just those neutral responses. Remember I said I didn't like having to go through and figure out which was the most neutral? This pulls it out right for you, right for administrators, school boards. You can find it really easy, and then start digging in. Now, the caveat I'm going to give you with this toolkit is it's not to replace the reports. It's just to give you a starting place, because sometimes what comes out, what I'm guessing you're going to find in your data is some of the bottom 5, maybe things you haven't worked on. Maybe are things that haven't been a focus for the district or the building. So we might say, okay, we haven't worked on that. That's okay. I'm okay with where it is, because I have these other initiatives that I've been working on. I want to find those. That's where I jump back into the report and find out those other initiatives that I've been working on. Okay, so that's my caveat. It's not to replace the reports. It's just to give you a starting point, because there's a lot of data there. Let's see. Okay, so this is the I versus they gap again. Okay, but we pulled it on the toolkit, just a little bit different look, just to keep you on your toes on how to look at different visualizations of data. What this will show you is the I versus they gap over time. So you can see here, this building started with 33.3% and went down to 22.3%. So the gap, the gap narrowed. So you'll see a negative number there because the gap is less. Here you can see the gap got wider. It's a positive percentage. So that's not the direction we want to go. This is good to see it on this side of the line. Okay. When you look at your toolkit, there's just some guiding questions in case I'm not around to ask questions, or if you're like me, you're reading it late at night because you like to read data late at night. I don't know. You can ask yourself some, it gives you some guiding questions and some things to look at if you forget. So, so that's what you're going to look at on that page. I feel like I missed a page here. Let me go back. Nope. This is what your top 5, bottom 5 will look like. This is just for staff. And I just pulled out this visualization off of a staff toolkit. So you see, these are the top 5 positive responses. These are the bottom 5 positive responses. You can see this is still really positive. Okay, it's still 47% positive. You may see some, I can't remember on your data, you may see some that are down like 16% positive, because we've thrown in a module in there that a lot of districts haven't worked on some of those initiatives yet around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't remember off the top of my head about yours, because I've done 3 of these in the last 2 days. So I can't remember.
And just a note for those looking at home, the last 2 pages shown are not our school's data, I don't believe.
No.
Yeah.
No, they're just for you to look at.
Yep.
And then this is the land of opportunity. So these are the questions that have the most neutral responses. We'll give you 5. Okay, because we figured the top 5 you're going to want to work on. But what we found was there were a lot of buildings who had like 10, 15 that were in the 33 or above range, that we really felt like this might be something you want to look at and be aware of, that you've got a lot of neutrals in there. So there, you possibly could have a page that has another set of land of opportunities that has more neutral on it. Common questions. This is just a snippet of the page that you'll look at. So you can see here's just a few of the buckets that we've put together: engaged students, high expectations, interventions for struggling students. You can see over time, this is the staff. This is student would be the next one, and parents are always the last one in that construct. But you can see here this year, there's a big gap in the perception between what students think and what staff think around that particular question about students are engaged in learning. Okay.
In that district.
That's not your district.
Right.
Yeah, this is just, I'm just showing you, so we'll give you an idea what to look at. So
just reinforcing that for the folks at home, because
yes,
our numbers are very different.
Yes, yeah. So you can see there's a good gap here, but this one is around behavior expectations. I always think this one usually reflects some unexpected expectations that we as adults may not have told the kids. So it could be that the adults are expecting kids to follow these expectations, but the kids don't know them. An example I had back in this will tell you how old I am. We still had swings on the playground. And the expectation was the students would know how to swing. Well, most of the kids I got in my building weren't ever around swings. So they came not knowing. So we had to figure out that, oh, that's our expectations. We need to teach them that. So that's just a little side note, but you can see there's some differences here between perceptions between groups, and that's important to know. This is just the change in the positive responses from one year to the next on those constructs. Okay. Okay, so here we go. What I want you to do is, I've shown you the main pages of the toolkit I want you to look at. There's other pages in there you may want to look at. That's fine. This is your time. But what I want you to do is pick a page and then really get to know it. And then I want you to come back and you're going to teach us about that page and what you found about the data on that page. Okay. This one we're going to give you about, I'm going to give you 9 minutes. So you have to learn it fast.
And before we do that, we have a clarifying question from Lori Johnson in Freeland. Is the data that you're showing when you're digging in all staff in our district? I believe I heard that this is not building level. Appreciate the comprehensive data.
Yes, it's all the district. It's
Yep.
The district roll up of all the buildings.
Thank you.
So, okay, any questions about your assignment? So you're going to be an expert when you come back, and now it's 8 minutes. Got it. Can't wait.
Just so we don't duplicate, is anybody else doing whether respondents share common beliefs and perceptions? Cool, I'm doing that one.
We have about 1 minute. Okay, so let's come back together. When you get ready to share, if you'll tell me which page you picked, I have the toolkit up and I'll go ahead and put the page that you're talking about on the screen so that people can see it. Ready, set, go.
I'll start by saying I didn't pick a page. I was too involved in looking at everything. So
I love
I
it.
will let you guys, I'll defer to you guys to do the teaching.
I love it. Go ahead, Marnie.
Oh, go ahead, Marnie.
Oh, go ahead, Andrea. All right, I'll begin. I'll begin because I'm just so excited to talk about student perspectives because I think our students have such valuable insight. And so I picked the page Land of Opportunity Student 2021. And I noticed some opportunities for innovative approaches to education, including maybe more modeling of how to divide work into manageable pieces, opportunities for keeping work interesting and challenging, and opportunities to find ways to help students take a fresh look at things they find difficult. I thought the note that almost a third of students answered sometimes true to the statement, most students are respectful of others at this school, raised a question for me around how do we define, model, and nurture respect? I also saw responses shifting from neutral to negative that appeared to me to reflect on student self-confidence or self-esteem. Statements like, I pay attention to how I feel, I finish whatever I begin, I concentrate on my schoolwork, I am a hard worker, I solve problems by first breaking them into smaller steps. And to me, this might indicate that there's an extra need or opportunity for social emotional support to help students with positive self-assessment, self-confidence, and opportunities to feel successful in their studies.
Marnie, can you tell me where you're looking?
Yeah, it's in the toolkit on the page that says, what is your current Land of Opportunity Student 2021 school year?
Okay.
Page 11 of 14.
Oh, that's staff.
Looks like that one though. That's the one.
Yep.
Great. And then finally, I saw that there were shifts from neutral to positive in areas around feeling students feel good about their cultural and ethnic background, their families feel welcome, and the school respects student differences, as well as positive shifts in seeing teachers telling the purpose for lessons and in seeing peers doing schoolwork. My only caveat with that is I'm wondering if, from student perspective, the question around my peers are busy doing schoolwork, I guess seeing a shift towards more positive responses to seeing peers stay busy may feel positive, and yet I remember when I was a student, I might have liked a little less busy work. So I'm curious around how that's framed from adult perspective versus student perspective. And that was my...
Great. Where you can find that, there is a question that goes with that on the common questions. So you can compare the, yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
That seems like a good
I'll go
transition.
ahead and go. So I looked at, do respondents share common beliefs and perceptions? And the pieces that I noticed here was, first off, just the marked positive trend forward, shifting a lot of those oranges and reds into blues, which I thought was really telling of the work that we have put in. And if we go down to the bottom piece where we look at it across the board, those positive trends were seen both by staff, students, and parents for the majority. And the portions where we didn't necessarily see an increase on the parent side, the percentage for one was less than 1% and 1.2 for the other percent. And so I was really happy with that, especially around the areas of growth that we had to do around behavior standards, bullying, safety, and kind of the interventions for struggling students. And the parents actually had an 8.1% increase on interventions for struggling students, and then a 13.8% increase on the positive for the behavior standards. And I thought that that was really just a reaffirming message for our staff that what we're doing is helping across the board. Yeah, the other areas that I really wanted to call out was around safety, because these were areas that really pulled at us as a board. Students believe the school is a safe place. That went from 61% to 86%. The student question, I feel safe at this school, went from 64 to 77. And my student feels safe at school, 75 to 79.
Great, thanks. And I just want to note, you guys had a large parent response. You should be proud of that parent response that you got. We don't typically, even in large districts, that would have been, they would have been celebrating with the numbers that they got, that you did in South Whitby. So kudos, whatever you did worked. So.
Well, that segues beautifully into the page that I studied. I was looking at, let me pull it up real quick. I looked at the land of opportunity for parents in the 2021 school year. Looks like it's page 13, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've got, yep, it's on the screen.
Perfect, because one of the things I love about this district is that our parents are involved, and they become involved at kindergarten, and they stay involved all the way through 12th grade. And I think that's really reflected in some of this data. I love the fact that right on top is my student understands the purpose of each lesson. Parents have had this awesome opportunity, especially this year, to be part of their kids' school day. My kids sat at the kitchen table all year and did their schoolwork. And so I heard some great lectures. I learned some stuff. It was amazing. And I think that some of that is reflected here. And I also see the correlative work around bullying and harassment. I think that's a land of opportunity piece, and speaking to diversity. And that's some of the stuff our school district, our administrators have been working on this year really specifically. And I love to see those be highlighted in this data. So for me, this was a really lovely page to look at, because our parents are involved, they have things to say, and they really are noting that they see their kids being successful, and not only that, but being happy and being ready to learn from the bottom of Maslow's theory all the way up to the top. And that speaks to what we're doing and what we can continue to dig into.
Thanks for sharing that. As you were talking, I just had this I want to know more question come into my head was, I wonder if I looked at parent responses across all that we've done this year, if we would see an increase in some of these, because they do know what their kids were doing because they were there. So that's how data works for me. It's like, oh, I wonder.
Right. Well, and again, it's hard to know which direction data goes, because we have had a very interesting 18 months. that we weren't planning on. But it is really heartening to see, to see that neutral data be something that we know we're working on now, and that those goals align with what parents care about, and that's really important.
Yeah, great. Good celebrations. Good.
And I looked at the where are we seeing the most change from 2020 to 2021, page 5 in the overall toolkit. And I was looking through this, looking at some of the specific jumps. The thing that jumped off the page at me first was the relative, the size of the numbers in the blue versus the size of the numbers in the orange and the red. That we had a lot of things moving strongly in the right direction. It was a little more equivocal in the parent, but for the staff and the students in general, the positives were moving a lot more than the negatives were. I noticed that there's a lot of, in all three of these, there's improvement in communication, as I think it was Marnie and Andrea were saying earlier. That's really been one of our focuses, and we're actually really seeing that with the parents. This school communicates with me about my students' progress, 10.9% positive. Parents and families and employees at this school talk respectfully to each other, 9.7. This school communicates effectively with my family, 8.4. And up in the staff, also the district leadership communicates effectively with my school. Collaboration between district and schools is based upon trust and respect. Students understanding the expectations. All of those community and all of those communication issues it was very gratifying to see in the top 5 responses in most of these areas. And also the rules about behavior being equitably applied to all students, that showing up in each of these spots was also fantastic. Seeing it at the top of the parents at 13.8, seeing it second for the students at 17.5. I believe it was just under the top 5. I think it was somewhere around 20% for staff, so it didn't show up there. And then there were some interesting things in the negative also. Clearly, we haven't been able to do classroom-based professional development activities since we haven't been in classrooms until the last few months. Again, classroom observations are difficult to do in this environment. So that was an interesting thing. One of the things that caught my attention and something that we may have to lean on a little bit more in the staff portion was the social emotional, the drop in positive responses for the social emotional sections. The development of the student social emotional learning enhances the learning environment in our classrooms, and I incorporate social emotional instruction into my daily instructional delivery. So those are some opportunities for us, I think, to bring some opportunities down to our staff to let them to help them address those points. As was mentioned earlier, the student survey, the areas that went down were very much so and I realize I'm doing that solutionitis that a lot of these seemed very pandemic driven. A lot of them seemed very, I'm just tired of Zoom. The staying focused on my goals, pay attention to how I feel, solve problems by breaking them into smaller steps, concentrate on my schoolwork, working with other students. So, but I don't want to assume that that's the answer. So I think that that's certainly a place that we can look at to see if there might be some other explanations there by comparing to some of the other data.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you pointed out that communication piece, because while you guys were working, I went back in to look and see, because that had been called out a couple of times, and it was nice. I was like, oh, I hope somebody catches that. Yeah. I would say some of these things that you think might be pandemic related, you can ask questions, you can dig deeper. I would not make big adjustments around those. I would wait to get another data point or two before I went, yeah, we need to look at this, but just have it on your radar. you know, because you don't have enough information yet. So good job, you guys. You got next. I have another one.
Hey, Ronnie,
Yeah.
would you mind if I did page 2?
No, not at all. I would love it.
Because I think I think it really needs to be called out, because
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I look at the staff. This is particularly heartening to me, because if you look at it, we have a staff that's really starting to work together effectively to solve problems, and the gap is lessening. So I know that, you know, each building has its own set of data to look at and discuss with staff and dig into, but I felt really good about this. 100%, I am willing to work to change my school for the better. That's district wide. So that's wow, right? So I really, I mean, I know we have a dedicated staff. It's just really nice to see it come out here, and the gap between I versus they. Again, in my time in the district, that has really lessened over time. So I just wanted to call that out. I thought that was really good to look at. So thank you.
Yes, great. Thanks, Joe. And I think I told the administrators yesterday, these numbers for the gaps, we didn't see those across the board this year. Most, even districts who had their gap was small last year, the gaps for the most part went up. So you guys do have some huge celebrations. So
Yeah. So could you speak to that just for 30 seconds? Where are we in your experience as a district? Are we, you know, is that even a fair question? I mean, are I just see a lot of positives and a trend to the better. And is that an accurate picture based on our 2 years, our 2 data points, that we're seeing improvement in general?
I would say yes. You know, I don't want to compare you to say where you are to other districts, because there's a lot of so many different contextual things that play in. But overall, when I looked at your data, I went, great celebrations here. You know, there's some stuff in the, you know, in the details to look at, but overall, you guys have some runway to move, to be able to get off the ground with some of the initiatives you may want to be working on. You know, some of the heavy lifting that's going to come up with diversity, equity, and inclusion, you've got the bandwidth to do that with the people who say they're ready to move. I can't say that in all districts. In fact, I think I told the administrators yesterday, it's not often I see 100% for that question. So you've got some great bandwidth to be able to do some really good initiatives and getting deep into what you want to accomplish. So did that help, Joe?
Very much. Thank you.
So wrapping up, you do have a diversity module that we're not going to have time to get into. It's at the back of your current, the current administration. We didn't look at that one today. Remember, that's your first data point on all of those. So don't expect to be able to pull a lot of information to say you still need to be doing some more, having more conversations and digging in around that module. And it is an important module. So next year we will have some longitudinal data for you from 1 year to the next on that one. So I wanted to give, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just going to piggyback on that we've made a commitment to continue doing this each May. And this was our, so we're in a 3-year cycle. Last year we started, actually we're in a 4-year cycle, and we've committed for the current year and 2 more years already. So we'll be able to start seeing trends.
Yeah. So I just want to give you a brief overview of my thoughts about your data and where you are. Now, I come at it with no context. So all I know is we both live on an island. Mine happens to be West Seattle and the bridge is out. You have to take a ferry. So or drive around. So we're both kind of, that context is about the same. We both have been in a pandemic. That's about all I know. I've been to South Whitby once when my nephew played football when he came over from Chelan. So that I know where you are. So so I have no context. So I just looked at the data. This is just right from the data. And I made some judgment calls, and this is what you get. So for district, your current staff, this is huge. I'm willing to change my school for the better. So celebrate that and move with it. This is the one that has opportunity for you, and the district facilitates alignment of curriculum across grades and schools. Okay, a large neutral there, 44%. So maybe it's been done, maybe it hasn't, maybe it's time to do again. So that would be where I would say, that's one I would look at. You can see that the N count here is smaller. We only ask that of instructional staff. So if it was somebody who wasn't working directly with students, they wouldn't have answered that question.
Ronnie, would a neutral under that question potentially capture an elective teacher or somebody where they may not necessarily see a need for vertical alignment? Like if I'm thinking like a PE teacher or an art teacher.
It could. I mean, I would have to ask them that question.
Okay.
Yeah, it could. Longitudinally, so these are where I saw the biggest changes. District leadership communicates effectively with my school. Huge celebration. There are some places that number is not even, it was negative. So you've done a good job. So celebrate that. The least amount of positive change was our teachers engaged in classroom-based professional development activities. I would say, my guess is they did. They just didn't, that word classroom might have meant something different to them. So I would this is one, even though it has the least amount of positive change from year to year, I might just sit on this one a little bit and see what happens the next year, because it could be they didn't, classroom meant they were in the building versus classroom meant we were learning how to do things virtually. Okay. For your student, the most positive currently was I'm respectful of students at this school, of other students at this school. High percentage of positive there. The least amount of positive was in my classes, I learned how to better understand my emotions. I did want to point this one out because you've got 44% that it's negative here and 25% that's neutral. So this is a big area where you might, I'd be having some conversations about this to dig in a little more. Okay. I would also look and see what it looks like longitudinally. Did it do a big nosedive this year? Because we weren't really looking at that during the pandemic. So dig into that one, but I just, I wouldn't shift everything because of this, but know that it's there.
If I'm recalling correctly, it did go down this year.
Okay. So the other pieces longitudinally, in my classes, students are busy doing work. Somebody called that one out. So what I usually look for is I want to make sure that these two numbers are negative numbers. So that, but I want to make sure that this negative number didn't go down to this neutral number didn't go down to a negative number, because remember, it can go either way. So you can see here's one place where it did. So we've had some neutrals that moved down to a negative. In class, we often work with other students to solve a problem or a task. Well, we can assume that it's because of the pandemic, but it might not be. So just more questions. And then you've pointed out your parent pod is positive about communication and materials or in a language that they can understand. This is time is spent doing work that students find useful and interesting. That kind of goes hand in hand with what the students were saying a little bit. So, you know, some of these you can dig into, or you could wait and just see what happens this next year when we're back full time. And then the last one is the parent longitudinal, 273 or 311 respondents. That's, if anything, celebrate how many parents responded to your survey, because it's huge. It's huge. For a little district, it's huge for a big district. So behavior rules. So they're seeing that there's a positive change. They're seeing that the behavior rules are equitable among students. And then understanding the purpose of the lesson. When we talk about the purpose of a lesson, are we talking about targets? What are we talking about? Do they understand what you intended, we intended when we put the word purpose in there? So okay.
That one was an interesting one because the students noted that they were being told the purpose of the lesson more frequently, or they had a higher positive response on their version of that question. So that was an interesting dichotomy to me.
Yeah. So I think there's there's a question with the learning target, and then there's one about purpose. So that it could be the verbiage that is used there, just to dig into. So I don't make any judgments just with one data point. So well, anymore. I have in the past. Like I said, it wasn't always a good thing. So I have kept you 5 minutes over. I apologize. I just want to say kudos to you guys as a board for letting me come in and work with you around this data. I don't get to do that often enough with boards. And what that does is it shows your community and your staff how important this data is, how important the data are, and how you're going to, they see that you're using it and there's going to be some response to the data. So kudos to you. If you're not a data geek, I hope maybe I made you one after this and you want to dig in more and ask questions. Like I told Joe, if you have questions, go ahead, feel free to email me. Joe has my email. I'm happy to answer questions for you. If you need me to come back, happy to do that. So with that, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I know that we're over time. So either way.
We do have a little flexibility. So I did have a couple of questions, but I wanted to open it up to any other board members who had a couple first. I also wanted to express my gratitude to you for taking the time to go in depth and walk us through some of the process. That was very valuable to me as an amateur stats geek, seeing how some of the professionals walk through it and look at it.
Good, I'm glad it was helpful.
And it was actually fascinating to me. You noticed in going through the data something that I wanted to ask a question about, which was whether the drop in some of the quote unquote academic scores was comparable in other districts of the area. If you knew that, because some of those grit and I feel comfortable completing these tasks and I understand these tasks and I'm working with students. And I was curious if you had noticed if that had dropped across the board or if that was specific to our district. I
haven't done that kind of digging. I really haven't looked into that. So I would, if my recollection is correct, it's been kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and I don't want to try to nudge any off the cuff responses. I want to give you the time to.
Yeah, no, I think if I had noticed a trend, I mean, I would point that out. I don't think that I have, so I
had another question like that about the difference in scores between students and parents, if that was a thing that you noticed in other districts. The parent responses were typically significant. Well, I'm editorializing there a little to say significantly lower than student responses, but noticeably lower on average.
Those are kind of all. All I can say is they're not the same from one district to the next.
Okay.
I would say what I see in Mercer Island is definitely different than what I see in Wapato, as far as the difference between parent percentages. So I it's
Just knowing that is very useful because that means that we can look at where we can address things, work on that communication a little bit more.
Just want to express my gratitude for your time. It really is helpful to have a trained eye on the data to help us draw our attention to what's supportive of our movement forward. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could help.
Anything else from any of the board members or Dr. Moshe?
I just wanted to thank Ronnie. She spent a lot of time with the admin team and now with the board, and it really gives us the ability to take the data forward now and use it, especially now that we've got a second year. And so, you know, we'll work with it over the summer and then be able to work with staff in the fall and continue to build. So I was really pleased with the data that came through. It really demonstrates, even in a pandemic, that we're making progress and we're making significant progress. And, you know, for our staff to feel that they're making an impact and demonstrating it through this survey is just, it's remarkable. So I feel really good about it. And yes, we have runway, as Ronnie calls it, but that's a good thing because we know where our focus can be.
I'd like to thank you too for all your efforts, and I love looking at this stuff, and I'm going to look at it more on a bigger screen. But the one question does come to my mind, and you don't have to answer it now, but it'd be great if you, over time, you're able to answer it. And it's similar to what Brooke was asking earlier, and that is based on the pandemic and how the challenges that we faced in moving to remote learning last year, and then how we've increased or, of course, improved on how we've done that this year, I would definitely see as an improvement. But it makes me then wonder, since we're not in class so much, how does that affect the in-classroom responses and so forth? So on a statewide, looking at it from a statewide level, what would be the analysis of how the pandemic has maybe influenced some of the responses that we did receive for everybody throughout the state? I'm just curious on how that would actually look, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and because we don't, not all districts choose to use our services. I can't make a statewide comment about that, but I can say, I know that we're looking at this year and we've got a pin in the, you know, on the calendar that this is the pandemic year. What's all the data look like before and after? So
that's exactly, and I know you don't do every school district, but from all the ones that you do in the state of Washington is what I'm referring to. It would be interesting information to have.
Yeah, no, we're curious to find that out too, because it's like some of the things that we had envisioned being one way went the other way and vice versa. And it's like, well, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. Oh,
and I'll make it like, for example, I feel safe in the classroom. Well, my classroom, is it at home behind the computer, or is it classroom at class? Yeah. So, you know, so those are the kind of some of the things that were going through my mind. But again, thank you. I found it very informative and very useful information.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. I'm happy to be here. I'd love to come back and work with you sometime when I can take the ferry and come visit. So I'm always up for a road trip, especially after a year of being in my office. So anyway, thank you for having me. And again, kudos to you for, you know, digging into the data and working hard tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for working hard with us. I appreciate the time.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And that I'm gonna have to get over my stats nerdness so we can move on, because I love digging into that data, and I will continue to dig into that data just because it fascinates me. The next one is to you, Dr. Moshe, to talk to us about some of the changes to signage on some of our bathrooms.
Thank you. And Christy's going to bring that up for me. So we had a meeting and we had a couple of board members at that meeting. We've been meeting monthly with the United Student Leader Group. And they talked to us about topics on a monthly basis. And their topic last month was creating, using our single-use bathrooms as gender neutral. There's a variety of reasons for that. One is, why do we, I've experienced standing in front of an empty men's room when it was labeled men's room while their women's room was in use. Why do we do these things? So we have looked at all of our single-use bathrooms. They, of course, the students were looking at it as a much bigger issue, wanting to, take into consideration how we might provide more restrooms that are gender neutral. But for now, we started with those single-use rooms. So at the elementary school, we have 4. The South Campus, we have 5. At the 712 campus, we have 8. And at the district office, we have 2. And you can see the signage that we're using simply says all gender restroom. And any place that I go these days, any single-use restroom is for anyone. And so we've made that happen across the district. So I know that the 2 board members that were attending the meeting asked for an update at this meeting. So here it is.
Well, and I'm always happy when there's a straightforward solution that helps everyone in this case. Like you mentioned, Dr. Moshe, about standing in line for when there's an empty bathroom right next door, or students who are non-binary who don't want to have to make the choice between male or female for which restroom they go into, and it doesn't matter when there's just one toilet and a sink inside.
Right.
Anything we can do to make our students and our staff more comfortable, I think, is very valuable and wonderful to do, especially when it's something this simple.
Well, that was my question, Brooke, on the single-use restroom. Is that a restroom with just one toilet in there, or are we talking like a single-use restroom for men that maybe has 3 urinals in there?
No, these are all, it's a toilet and a sink and a door that locks, and it's meant for one person.
Thank you for clarifying that for everybody out there.
Yeah, these are just, like you'd go into any facility where you see a restroom, it typically now will say, or it'll have a picture and, a changing table or whatever. It's the single rooms.
Single
Thank you, Joe.
occupancy.
Dr. Moshe, I was one of those board members that asked for this update, and I'm grateful. I appreciate this, what feels like a straightforward solution to the presenting problem of standing outside a bathroom that's labeled for a gender other than one's own, wishing one could use it if it is unoccupied.
Yeah. So this is already, that sign that I've shown there is already up on the restroom. That's an actual picture of one of our restrooms, the door, the door of it. So yeah, it's something we were able to do quickly. So I appreciate actually our Director of Buildings and Grounds and Maintenance, JJ. I asked him for a list, and I asked him to do it, and he was able to do it in a couple weeks. So I really appreciate his time to do that.
Not to put you on the spot, but a question from a year or so ago, we had the request for toilet seat covers. Have we reached that point yet?
Toilet seat cover. You mean the paper?
Yep.
Yeah, I can't answer that off the top of my head if we have installed those units, but I believe the restroom that I use today has them. So I haven't looked in every one in the district, but I certainly can ask that question. Okay, so that's all I had on restrooms.
Thank you, Dr. Moshe. I love a simple, quick solution. The next item on the discussion is leadership training. Myself and Anne and Dr. Moshe sat in on 2 presentations for possible leadership training for the board and superintendent. some ways to approach expanding our leadership capabilities to better serve the district. And I was hoping that the three of us could talk a little bit about each of those two, and the other three board members could ask any questions that they have, and then we can talk about whether or not we want to work with one, the other, or both, or neither.
Would you like me to do a little framing and then we can add to it? Okay.
Sure.
So actually, Andrea and I had conversation because given her day job and how it's similar, we come across trainers often. And so I came across Dr. Tammy Campbell, who is working on leadership training around around a district's data and what your data demonstrates and how to improve that. And then we heard from Heather Lechner and talked about how to approach district-wide equity training. And so we heard from both very different approaches to how to work with our leadership team, and the leadership team being the board and the admin team together. And one of the hopes is that we could do this a 4-hour initial in-person training in August. And again, I want to give equal time to both. I'll start with Dr. Campbell. She talked a lot about using an equity lens to approach our data and differentiate our data around our scholars and their performance. So the bottom line being, how are our students performing? And when you break it out by demographic groups, how are those groups performing? Are they on the same or a different level? And if they're on different levels, what do you do to address particular needs, take down barriers? How do you really dig into what's actually happening with students? And Brooke, I'll stop
So
there.
the reason that Ann and I were grinning there at the use of scholars is one of the little tiny things that can have a big impact on how people look at the district is she calls all of the students in the district scholars to emphasize that they all have the capability for high achievement. And I really love that. And I'm trying to get it into my brain because I think it's just a fascinating little tweak. The thing I really liked about Dr. Campbell's presentation was it wasn't looking at just one part of the equity conversation. She was looking at disaggregating all of the data, looking at socioeconomic level, at
Gender,
ethnicity, at gender, at
yep.
anything we track, looking at all of it to see what gaps might be escaping our notice.
And even things like, how we deal with student discipline. Is it disproportionate discipline? How do we deal with AP courses? How do students get into AP courses? Things like that, so that we're really looking at how we're performing as a district and then addressing those specific areas and doing that as a leadership team, and then moving that into our work with teachers around student performance and looking at it through a disaggregated lens.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about her presentation while we were doing the work with the CEE right at the top of the meeting, because a lot of her training does, like you said, it pulls that apart, and it speaks to everything from how teachers and scholars work together, how language is so effective in, creating an atmosphere, creating an environment, maintaining that environment. And so I can see a lot of correlation between what we just learned in the CEE and will continue to learn, and how her equity work speaks to each and every one of those things that we just celebrated in that data.
And it also feels like it takes it to that next level. We've been talking a lot about taking down barriers, and this becomes really, it's all about the academic performance of our students, their social emotional well-being, their, you know, all of the pieces of a student's day, a scholar's day. And then how do we work with our teaching staff to make those changes, to look at those differences and to address them?
And I like it as an additive to the CEE survey, because the CEE survey gives us the perception of how things are working. Whereas this can look at the data and see how it's actually impacting from a pure numbers perspective, to see if there's anything where the perception doesn't meet the actuality.
Sure. I think I think their trainings would really give us a clear perspective on strategies, like how to strategize to move forward in that data and really extrapolate it out into action, which felt really powerful to me, because she was all about action and results. And that's fantastic to hear.
And again, just to back up a little bit, because we've been talking about this leadership opportunity for our board and our admin staff. It's professional development. We bring in folks to do professional development for our teaching staff, for our other staff as well. We're going to really focus effort on making sure all of our paraprofessional staff are involved in trainings as we go forward next year. We shouldn't leave our leadership to figure out their own training, right? We should be very conscious of how do we want to train our leadership staff to work together. So I just think, you know, just to give it some context, that the board's been asking for, you know, some more training on how to use an equity lens. So.
Well, and if I recall correctly, Tammy was very excited about working in tandem with a board and an admin staff.
Yep.
That's not something, it sounded like that's not something she gets to do all the time. And so working.
So again, exactly. And the ideal would be, right, the board sets our goals for the district, the board and leadership team work together. Then we work as a leadership team with the teaching staff, and then it's brought to the students. So the whole point is to bring this all the way through, not just in segments. And the work we're doing with staff around professional development will also be in tandem with this. So it, again, you know, we haven't talked about the other opportunity.
Well, and I'd like to answer questions or comments from the board and the community on on Dr. Campbell's training first, so that we're not comparing them directly, because it isn't necessarily an either or, it's a neither, right, either, or both.
Right, because they're different, absolutely.
So if there's anything else on Dr. Campbell's,
So I did have a couple of questions that I'm hoping you might have insight into. Part of what I know I struggle with is, even when I'm looking at the data or the markers, because I come to the table the way that I do, I don't necessarily know what I don't know. Mm-hmm. And so would part of the professional development be, in part, Dr. Campbell looking at that data with us and helping us see what we don't necessarily naturally just
Yes. Know? Yes. Her whole point is, so it would start with this would start on August 11th. Mm-hmm. Then I'll just give you the literal rundown, right? August 11th, we'd have a actual opportunity in person to have lunch together, and then work for 4 hours around the process and around starting to look at our data and what our mission is for this. What is our why? Okay. And breaking that down. And then that would be in person. And then there would be opportunities for homework in between,
Mhm.
and then a 1 or 2 hour session periodically with her to say, okay, you know, here's what you left with, this is what you were to do over the, these last 4 weeks or whatever,
Yeah.
and let's discuss where we are now. So it would definitely be the practical, the how do we really do this work, not just admiring the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, or just not even seeing it, right?
Right.
The other wonder that I have, and this comes from having larger conversations with other districts that are also small, not from any conversations I've had with our district. But we do have a small district, which, as we just discussed with the CEE survey, our sample sizes are very small. And sometimes what I will hear said is, even though we are looking at data where we know if we were looking at the same numbers in a district the size of Kent with a district the size of Seattle, we could say, oh no, this is like actual like achievement gap data. In small districts, I have seen it be attributed to, well, that student comes to the table with X, Y, and Z, versus looking at this student is part of a larger whole and part of a larger system that's national. Knowing Dr. Campbell comes from a larger district, do you have the feeling that she will be able to help us navigate that conversation should it come up?
I'll let
So-
Brooke answer that since he asked it.
Oh,
This
good
is
job,
actually
Brooke.
something I asked. And we would be this, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be the smallest district she has worked with, but the next smallest was like 1,300 students.
Yeah,
Okay.
So she worked with comparable district sizes.
yes,
And
Yeah.
worked on how to separate the noise from,
Yeah.
separate the
Okay.
data from the individual.
and the bottom line, her approach is a systems approach, right? That is the whole goal of this, and leading
Oh, I
for
love it.
equity.
She talks about it being in every single vein of every single thing you do. You don't, equity is not its own component, that it is part of absolutely everything you do.
Everything. And she makes it very clear. She's not here to talk about equity, bias, any of that. She's here to talk about, let's look at your data, reflect on your data, and engage in a real problem of practice and make a plan. And in between the time that she's here and the next time she comes, here's the strategic planning we're doing, here's what we're coaching, but it's very strategic. It's not
There's no emotion in it. It's just
right.
numbers.
It's exactly that. And it kind of takes us to the next level of we talk about these concepts, but what does equity mean for the students in the classroom who are experiencing South Whidbey, right?
And I would
What is their
like-
academic opportunity, their social, their SES opportunities, their barriers, and how do we move them out of the way?
And I'll note that we do get the emotion from the CEE survey. We get how people feel that way. So this is a fantastic complement to that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not trying to say that, yes, and as Ronnie said, it's, relationships are everything.
Yeah.
But this is that, the piece that focuses on student performance and how do we address that?
My experience is that the data will make you emotional, but that does not mean there is emotion in it.
Yeah. Good
Um,
point.
Marnie, Damien, anyone from the audience, the community, any questions, concerns, comments? Damien, I see you're shaking your head.
Yeah, Brooke, one thing that I have learned in my tenure here is I let educators be the educators, and I try to focus where I have my own niche. So I like to let people who have expertise in their areas bring forward what they have. So that's where I'm at.
And Marnie, I missed
And
you.
no questions from me, thank you. I'm interested later in hearing some general reflections from those who participated in both meetings, but at this time I have no questions. Thanks.
Well, if any questions come in from the audience, we'll address them then. Dr. Moshe, do you want to frame up Dr. Lechner and Dr. Boateng's presentation?
So they are the network for EdWork, and they have a particular structure, and their goal for us would be to create ally engagement, supporting the development of white leaders in education to dismantle unjust practices and structures in educational settings, to also create and sustain the opportunity for BIPOC educators to come here and stay here, and to really talk about how to become allies, how to engage around the head work, the heart work, and the community work, to recognize the impact of racism and to become an anti-racist organization. And their focus would be in trainings with the board and the admin team. And they would do 4 to 6 hour trainings, whether on site or virtual, around that effort. And their framework around that, they equated it to creating a healthy environment for everyone. It lifts everyone. So it's not specific to, yes, they talk about creating an environment for folks who are BIPOC, but it's really creating a good environment for all of us. And that includes folks who are BIPOC. And how do we do that? And so their work is it's different. It's just it's a different perspective. It could go in tandem. It could be, work we do next year as well, or the year after. It's not apples and oranges. It's apples and oranges. It's not comparing 2 apples and deciding which one we want. So they spent some time summarizing the opportunities that they would provide for us around that. So did I summarize that pretty well, Anne and Brooke?
Yeah, their emphasis was on creating a district environment that can recruit, support, and retain BIPOC educators, which is something we've struggled with as a district. And yeah.
Yep.
One of the things I really enjoyed about their presentation was that they facilitated it almost as if it were a training. And so they drew us right in right away. They're both very dynamic speakers. At one point, one of the presenters, her power went out because she was in
Ghana. She's in Ghana.
Right. And she just kept rolling through it, She's like, nope, I still have internet, I'm fine. And it was fantastic because they really just drew us right in right away. They offered us the opportunity to be allies. They offered us the opportunity to ask questions. They made no assumptions about where we are as a district. And they gave us, a really cool path forward to, continuing with our ally status and making everyone feel comfortable. And not only teachers who we might attract to the island and to jobs, but also those students who benefit greatly from having people of color teach them. And so it was a really great overall presentation, I think, of, how to, once again, give us language, give us action, give us strategies for how to move forward as a district in this, continuingly changing world of education. So I really appreciated their approach.
Yeah, and in keeping with what Anne was saying, they were mentioning that their work is grounded in relationships and building relationships and telling stories within the community. To try to make that community a welcoming one. Are there any comments or questions on that?
I always have comments, but I thought I would give Marnie and Damien a shot first.
Yeah, I just think about the context of South Whitby as a community outside or including the schools. And, this question around how does our community become a more welcoming space for BIPOC folks is a bigger question than simply how do we attract BIPOC staff and teachers and administrators to our school positions. So it would be very interesting to think about what can be offered by these folks in the context of the community we live in and the various pressures that that keep the demographics where they are here. I think it's a bigger conversation, and the schools is a wonderful place to start creating change.
I will say one of the things I noticed about the work that Heather and her colleagues are doing, it's pretty intensive and it takes a lot of bandwidth, I think, from whoever takes that on as a learning opportunity. And I think it's valuable and, might be essential. But it will take a lot of buy-in for people to really spend time on a real professional level to dive into the work at the level that would really create change eventually. And I was thinking, you're right, Marnie, like they look at things from a community perspective, and then they bring that all the way down into, each relationship that's being built within that community. And so it's really powerful work, but it's very intensive work too, I think. So that might be something you want to think about is, just how we all spend our time and what we work, how we work best in order to learn new things and not create an overwhelm.
Yeah, again, I don't want to stop any of the conversation, but that, and you captured it for me, my thinking around what we've experienced over the course of this past year. And I would like to get back to school in September, 5 days a week, and kind of regroup and reorient ourselves to our work. I see a very practical application for looking at our data and studying our data and improving student performance across the board. I personally am feeling like I've got enough to focus on. Again, if the board selects to go in this direction, I'm with you, right? I'm your employee and I will do as directed. But my opinion is that it might be more of a bite than we want to take for the coming year, because it is intense and it requires all of our attention. So that's my perspective. But I thought they were fabulous. I mean, they did draw us in. They talked a lot about the work and work that we want to do. I just I'm hesitant to take on too many initiatives.
Well, my 2 cents on this is it feels like I grew up here at South Whitby with a lot more diversity in teachers than what any of you guys have or what we had now. Some of them are still here. Lou Surface, Lucia Klein. Sure you can still find Mr. Underwood and Martine Wayman and a bunch of others. But since they're still here, why not ask them what attracted you here? What brought you here? How do we do that? I mean, you do have local people you could go to and ask, for getting those outside people to be interested in coming here. They certainly fit the bill, and they were here. And there's a lot more if I think about it from Mexico, and I can keep going. And there's other teachers like Jim Henderson probably knows, Jim Gardner knows, and that where these people are at here locally and how to reach them. But even Todd Peterson, traveled the world and walked across India by foot, and we had him as an English teacher for a long time. So there's people here locally that can certainly you can draw some additional information from as to what would be a draw to get people to come here. It's my 2 cents.
Yeah, bigger, one small part of a bigger strategy. Absolutely. I think that, our history as a district is important. And as a community, we've always had a lot of pride in our history. Having grown up in a small town that's not this one, but having an understanding of small towns, we can take a lot of pride in our, our citizenry and our community and how powerful schools have been in that. And so I totally agree with you, Damien, that there are definitely voices that would be welcome at the table anytime we're doing some of this work around strategically moving forward towards systemic change. So thank you for pointing that out.
All right, you guys ready for my thoughts?
Oh, I'm not ready yet. I want to share my thoughts.
Go for it.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Andrew. No, you really can go first if you prefer.
No, you can go.
I just wanted to really quick tag on that table metaphor because I think beyond just thinking about who we can invite to the table, there's this metaphor of is this table really suitable for all of us? And is it the table we all need? And perhaps might we need to dismantle the table and rebuild it in a way that is more suitable for all? And so I guess I would just suggest that in addition to wondering who could join us and where are they and how do we find them, it's a question of what is the culture that we're inviting folks to step into and how do we fundamentally shift it towards being a more inclusive and equitable culture. And I also appreciate that, Andrea, you earlier in the meeting, you shared that you don't yet know what you don't know. And as a person who has a socialized white identity, my worldview and frame of reference around what is and isn't welcoming and inclusive is limited by my perception. And so I'm just really grateful for opportunities to learn with others who have additional perspectives to help expand my vision of what a truly thriving school environment will look and feel like when more people are engaged, welcome, and safe here.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that Heather and her cohort do as part of their work is that they not only talk about that table metaphor in terms of, are we even at the right table? Is it the right kind of table? But also the difference between, inclusion, which is you're all welcome, and belonging, which is you have a voice here. And so I think that that's a powerful point. So thank you.
Thank you. And Andrea, thank you for your patience with my interruption. I didn't want to lose the table thread.
No problem. I wanted to give people opportunities to share because I have to disclose that I do have a bias with Dr. Lechner. I worked directly under her for a number of years, and I cannot express how much I learned from her. Like, she was an absolute game changer for me as a person, as a human, as a professional, absolute game changer. I also hold Dr. Campbell in really, really high regard as well. I haven't had the opportunity to work as intimately with her, but I do have that experience with Dr. Lechner. And one of the parts, Joe, when I heard that both of these people were on the table, I was like, oh, how do you choose? Like, because I also hear what you're saying of we have to be really intentional about what are we biting off, because we don't want to take on too much and do it poorly. We want to take it on and do it well. And they are also completely different.
Right.
So as I'm looking at my Post-it notes that I've been building across my desk, one of the things that comes to my mind is, what if we looked at it in terms of looking at who do we leverage into versus everybody has to be all in. And so one of the parts I was looking at was, what if with Dr. Campbell, we had that be much more intentionally focused in on the building leaders, because they do work most directly with the teachers. They are driving the instruction, but we have board representatives on that group that can then bring the data back up to this level. What that would open up capacity for is for either the board as a whole with leadership representatives coming up, or the whole group as a whole to work with Dr. Lechner and her team. Because I also think that we have made a very verbal commitment to the work that Dr. Lechner brings to the table. I think that she focuses in on what our next steps are, which is restorative conversations, healing across the community, everyone feeling like they have a voice and a place and a sense of belonging. And I think that if I think about what we as a board need to look at, that nails that on the head. Joe, I can't solve you having that much on your plate. I haven't gotten to that post-it yet. But I see.
Well, and again, it's not me, it's the system. So, you know, again, we've got the hooks global working with staff with our, we've got our PD days all lined out. We're doing a half day on August 30th. We're doing a 2-hour session every month with K6 staff and a 2-hour session every month with the 712 staff. We're going to do another half day in January. So we've got that happening in the buildings, and it's all about, there's also community components to that, and listening time and restorative. They're very interested in helping us do restorative work with our community around the harm. So we're exploring that, and we got them to the table. So I feel like I feel like we're doing a lot of that work, and I don't have, we made a commitment to them, right? So we have a contract, right?
We're not backing out of that. No.
Right. So I don't know how if we want to, maybe board members come to that training, or maybe we add on to hooks, or maybe we have Dr. Lechner for a session with the board as a one-time session.
I said, what if we started with Tammy in August?
Yep.
And then we looked at, as a board, of bringing Heather in maybe January, and looking at what that might look like.
That makes a lot of sense, because then we'll already be in process with, here's what we're doing around our data. Here's our, you know, our why. Here's our look at that piece. And you're right, maybe January, you know, January workshop with the board. It's a retreat in January. Maybe that's the, you know, we bring Heather in, we make a commitment with Heather and bring her in January, for example.
Yeah. And maybe part of that is we also look at, you know, we could ask hooks, do they have capacity to provide what Heather is offering, right? Do they have something comparable that could go up to a board level, right? So you could keep that in alignment, because there is something to be said about when you have this many voices at the table, we can't move in one direction, right? Like we have to kind of prioritize. So we could see if hooks could have that capacity. If they don't, we could also look at, does Dr. Lechner just start working with us on that community component, that communication component, that dismantling just the power structures that come with the board? Do we just start there and then see what that brings?
Yeah, one thing I didn't hear during their presentation was how it sounded like they can create like a package for us if it's for our district. I wasn't quite aware of like how well they can really kind of create you know, something for, like, let's say something for us in January that is compatible with the hooks, or is so I would be interested to know whether or not they can put together like a one-off for us to get started.
Let me see, they have a structure where you know, they design it to you. They can do in-person trainings, generally 4 to 6 hours, or virtual trainings 2 to 4 hours, and then they can do site specific, or so they'll do any, they have like a smorgasbord, a la carte model, I guess.
But I just didn't remember whether that was part of their model.
Yeah, so it depends on what the district's looking for. Do you want an a la carte model? Do you want a systems approach? So we could, you know, you could just I think with Dr. Campbell, it's a cycle of work. With Heather, it could be a one-time, let's do a 4-hour training on this topic, or a community forum on this topic. And I don't know if time-wise Hooks has the capacity or not. We are, folks get booked, so we would have to ask that question. And I'd be happy to do that. If the board decides on a direction tonight, I can certainly get with folks and say, all right, what can you do? I made tentative commitments so that I wouldn't lose the dates. But no firm commitment, so we can back away for any of it.
Sure. Well, just speaking for myself, I'm very much willing to time commit to both projects, to the extent that I can extend myself. And so I do like the idea of working with both groups. I think both of them bring something to the table that will really speak to our, that data we just touched on earlier in the meeting, and to our systems in general, and to building those relationships, because each presenter, Tammy and Heather, and tonight Ronnie, it all starts with relationships. And so I think that in itself is a common denominator that's really powerful.
I do want to note we have a couple of questions and comments from the community. I will read the ones that relate directly to this conversation. There are several of them that do. 2 of them are related, and I will remind folks to please include your full name and your area. I do know that for a couple of these folks. So Paul Rempa from Coopville and Lorinda Newton from Clinton asked similar questions. I'm going to combine them. And given that this is a rural, welcoming, and friendly community, what is your evidence that there is systemic racism in our community? I will note that many of the responses to our CEE survey, which I assume will be up on our website shortly for everyone to peruse, note that we still have some pretty solid inequities in, at very least, the perception of how people are treated in the school. One note from parents, and this is speaking to also an entire equity lens rather than just race and ethnicity, but this school has a welcoming environment that embraces the diversity of race, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. And we had 64% of people say that they agreed and 12% say they disagreed. That's one note. I would encourage those who are curious about some of the perceptions of systemic inequity in our system to take a look at some of those, some of that data and some of the questions asked, particularly of the students themselves who experience it, but also of the parents who see its effects. Actually, I do one more point from there that I can note specifically, and that was just a moment, trying to pull this up.
I also have some data points academically, Brooke, to speak to that. So
Absolutely.
other indications that we have systemic racism within our school systems would be that across our Hispanic and Latino race categories in English language arts, 50.8% of students are at standard, 37.1 are at standard in math, and 47.6 are at standard in science. That would be in comparison to our white students at 65%, 47, and 59%. So that's just about 10 to 15% achievement gap. For our students who are categorized under 2 or more races, for English language arts, their assessments are at 58%, 42% in math, and 52.2% in science. Again, compared to their white peers at 65.3 in ELA, 47.0 in math, and 59.4 in science.
Thank you. I would just add, in addition to thinking about how systemic racism shows up in our school district, there's also the bigger question of, does systemic racism exist in this rural community? And I would invite community members to do some reading on the both the skewed perception of racism in rural versus urban communities and the very real economic impact of racism in rural communities in particular, where the likelihood of segregation by race in housing due to economic disparities caused by systemic racism tends to be greater in rural communities. There's some good research on that subject out of the several universities and the Pew Research Center. So there are opportunities to learn about how the divide in perception of racism can be an obstacle to addressing racism in rural communities in particular.
Thank you both for providing that additional information that says much more specifically to the achievement gaps than what I could.
I also found numbers to speak to our diversity among staff. So 97.8% of our staff members identify as white, 1.1% identify as Hispanic and Latino, and 1.1% identify as American, Indian, or Alaskan Native. So we have a very, very white staff.
And we're at 20% of our students identify as other than white.
I am going to focus this discussion on what we are going to do, or what we're talking about here about these two training programs rather than broader discussions. I invite community comment on broader discussions in public comment at a business meeting or via email to the board. But because we are already at 9 o'clock and because we are our workshops do focus on specific topics, I do want to focus specifically on that. I will note Jackson Murphy of Clinton. I want to thank the school as a BIPOC student for taking this seriously and looking through all your work with an equity lender, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Probably,
for sharing that.
I'm guessing
Lens.
that typo was equity lens.
Yeah.
Yes, that you're right. That's probably a phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, from my perspective, here's what I think I'm hearing is that we can look into, it sounds like you are supportive of moving forward with working with Dr. Campbell, and that you would like a board focus on what either Dr. Lechner can offer or hooks around anti-racism training for the board.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can look into that and come back to you with thoughts from both Hooks and Dr. Lechner, and I can let Dr. Campbell know that we'd like to move forward. Is that, you know, again, I want to do what's doesn't require board action. It requires a board desire, right? The superintendent has the ability to move forward on these things as long as I'm, you know, doing what the board wants in terms of its own training. So if you give me a thumbs up, I will continue to pursue.
Yeah, can I just briefly speak to that question of what more to put on your plate, so to speak? Because I did hear you express just how many initiatives you have to move forward with as we readjust to learning in person and so on. And I just want to express a hope that what is engaged as professional development is energizing and actually makes work easier because of the shifting culture and expansive potential of the learning that the team can do together. So I would just say, while deciding on how to move forward, I would invite you to use your expertise to determine, is this adding work and demands upon our team's time and energy that we simply don't have capacity to address at this time? Or is this sort of lifting the boat so that we can all sail more easily forward? And I do think these sort of fundamental cultural pieces may feel like extra work and a lot of work right now, but the liberation of energy that they can create in the future will be more than worth the investment at this time.
I appreciate that. I am, again, I look at systemic capacity. I don't want you to leave with the feeling that it's the superintendent's plate. It really is about the systemic capacity and how we're using the time that we have. So I look at it as, for example, we really want to impact the change where the cliche rubber meets the road with teachers and students in classrooms. So we are doing work around ELA, English Language Arts adoption. So that's going to be some energy that teachers are going to be using. We are having a once a month training around anti-racism with hooks with our staff on one of their Wednesdays. And we are also wanting them to engage in their PLCs around academic achievement and reorienting students to school. So from the teacher perspective, I think our plate is full. Administratively, right, there's that piece of we have leadership capacity to do this work and to lead this work. And I believe the board has the desire and the energy to get this training. I think we can do this. And I believe that, hearing Andrea talk about how to, I was thinking all or none, as opposed to breaking it into, how do you eat an elephant? You eat them one bite at a time, right? So we can do both. We can do them simultaneously, and I think they will go together nicely.
I would not start Dr. Lechner until January.
Well, right. No, I heard you. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome, because we've got community things that will happen with hooks and so on, and teacher training with hooks. But for the board's training, I think we start in the fall with using Dr. Campbell and then move on to Dr. Lechner.
Yeah.
So
I very much liked Andrea's idea of
yep.
taking that up once we've got school back in session, once we've
Right.
got everyone settled back on campus in classrooms.
Yep.
And I think that that's also the perfect time to be looking at Dr. Tammy Campbell's
Yep.
look at systemic organizational policy design to look at where we might be underserving people, scholars who are experiencing homelessness, or some other group that might be invisible to us at the moment that some data study can really pull out. And I think that can really help us come back hard with both social emotional learning and reading, writing, arithmetic, social studies, all of that as we come back in.
Yeah, we're talking about the social emotional learning because that's where students have really, we hear all around us that's where they suffer, right? We've been working on keeping them up as much as we could academically, but again, we also looked at the CEE data and the alignment of our curriculum and the work we need to do in that vein. So we are, we're looking at a variety of things for next year that are pretty exciting, bringing in the alternative program, reinventing ourselves around our curriculum. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening, really exciting things happening. So again, I think all of this is very doable. The more you talked about it and the more we kind of looked in depth at it, I think, yeah, it sounds like a way to go forward.
Okay. All right. Let's. It sounds like we have a clear discussion way to move forward here. First with Dr. Tammy Campbell, and then looking to see if we can work with Dr. Lechner and Dr. Boateng second term.
Yep.
So
I will be in touch with them.
Yep. We do have other questions, but they are not in the queue, but they are unrelated to this topic. So given that this is a board workshop, I'm going to continue moving along to the next topic, and we can discuss that, which is our rotating banners.
Thank you. That, I just want to share my screen and I will get started. All right, just confirming that you can see my screen before I continue. Thank you. So again, just as a reminder for our vision, mission, and values, this is where we're coming from. This is what the work is for us, about lifelong learners who are multiculturally engaged, literate, and active in their community and ready for a global society. And I think we've had some really good examples of our students showing us that they're active community members and that they're prepared and that they know how to use their voice in the district. So with that in mind, we know about the 2 goals for the superintendent over the course of the year. And we also know very clearly that the banner at the high school that says Black Lives Matter, that has our vision on it, has created a lot of dialogue in our district. There are many people who like the banner being up and many people who absolutely dislike the banner being up. And we know that. And we've heard from our community that some of them say keep it, and others say make it more inclusive, and others say take it down. So we started to really, again, listen to student voice this year. And in that vein, we want to celebrate our students. We want to recognize that there are students in our community, for whatever barriers there are for them, are marginalized, whether it's member of a BIPOC community or somebody who's LGBTQ plus, somebody who has a socioeconomic status that is different. So we want to celebrate all of our students. So we want to expand on our use of banners and the message that they send. Again, always aligning with our vision. So we had conversation with student leadership about what that might look like. And again, as wise as students are, they want to support a wider variety of work around racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. So they've come up with a list based on what the federal recognitions are, and then they've added a few of their own. So for example, we look at August Civility Month. But they don't want just a banner. They want to, as students, call upon all of us, including their teachers, to bring it into the classroom. So what does it mean? What does it look like? And so these are the months and how they'd be identified. So we would start in August with Civility Month. And again, student designed. The only the banner is going to have the district logo and the district's vision on it, and then it will be relevant to whatever the month is. But inside the school, there will also be celebrations that are relevant to whatever the month of recognition is. So Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, Disability Awareness Month, Native American Heritage Month, International Human Rights Month in December. It's also World AIDS Day in December and Human Rights Day in December. Poverty in America Month, again, recognizing socioeconomic status and hunger. February, African American History. March, Women's History. April is Earth Month. So that reflects their desire to really look at climate change. May, Asian American Pacific Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness. Again, students saying mental health is a critical focus and they want to bring attention to it. And then June is Pride Month. So that's what they've laid out. Again, I think it is spectacular. I would welcome it and hand it to students to create the dialogue around it and to actually be in charge of changing out those banners on a monthly basis and changing out in-school displays and bringing it to classrooms. And this is coming from ASB leadership. So they're, from what they do to decorate the hallways during homecoming week to everything else that the ASB leadership does. I think this is a great way for us to evolve and to bring attention to a wider scope. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention because I know it's certainly something that has been talked about a huge amount. So I just wanted to let you know what we think the best next steps are. Appreciate that, the board has had lots of dialogue around this and lots of input. And I think that this makes sense in terms of our work around equity for everyone.
I very much appreciate both the inclusion of student voice. I think that that's a fantastic idea to reach out to them to see who they want to, which groups they want to recognize, which months. And I love the expansion to include more marginalized communities. I think that that's another fantastic step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I have on that.
That's outstanding. Thank you. As someone who has students in the district, this generation has a powerful voice. They want change and they want diversity and they want to be recognized. And so powerful that you and your staff went to the kids and said, help us understand what it is that you need. I see that more and more and more happening. And that it's so powerful as a citizen and as a community member and as a parent. It's just so powerful to see my kids have a voice and have their peers have a voice. So thank you for that work.
Well, as I've said in the past, it is definitely the teacher's choice what to put on those classroom walls. It's the principal's choice what to put on the principal's walls. And it's the superintendent's choice what to put on the district walls, fences, or whatever. Me personally, I didn't like the move to banners in the first place. That created the divisiveness that I think that we have. And I think that it's going to take a lot more than this to heal what's going on. But again, it's your call. I don't think it's something that the board has to stand behind or not stand behind. I mean, if they wanted to stand behind not doing it, that would be one thing and directing you not to, but it is your decision to do that. I just think that we should remain neutral for the most part and keep the classroom and teach that stuff in the classroom free from outside influences. All those things can be inside the school and everything else. I get the point, but I just think that we started down the wrong road here with putting up a banner in the first place, and we're going to have to continue with banners. And I don't know, maybe next it'll be the Jewish Defense League or whatever, but there's a lot of people out there that are going to feel that they should be included, and it can just continue to go on and on and on. And like I said, it is your responsibility and your decision, but if I have my 2 cents, I would prefer to take the stuff down off of our school walls, but that's my opinion.
Well, and Damien, I appreciate your opinion because the board directs the superintendent. So whether or not it's the superintendent's decision, it really is something that I'm bringing to the board because it has created such community dialogue. And I know I've tried to have this conversation with you. I've asked you to have conversation. I know you've been unable to free your schedule to do that. I think it's really important that the board take a look at how it wants to go forward because its students are asking for this kind of support. And so I recognize what you're saying, that, it's the superintendent's responsibility. It's also important that the board has a voice in something that has become such a community interest. And not everybody is divided. Some people feel very strongly. And we have a student who's voiced that, more than one student who's voiced their appreciation for being recognized. And so I think it's important that we not just teach it inside the school walls. People know that we teach students, and I'm not ashamed of the work we're doing on behalf of our students. So I guess I would ask for the board to really think about how it wants to move forward, because it's demonstrating to its community how it feels about its students, especially its students of color. So I'm not trying to cause divisiveness. I'm trying to find a path forward and not, and celebrate all of our students, because they all.
And I understand that, and I want to back up and clarify something here, just so you know. Yes, I have a terrible work schedule, and yes, I've been up since yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So yes, I'm very tired, but I'm here and I'm trying to be here as much as possible. As far as the banners go, I think the thing I'm trying to say is I wholeheartedly welcome all of this. I just don't know where it stops. And as you heard, I said the Jewish Defense League, then it can go into the Muslims, and it can go into the Christians, and it can continue to move on for anybody who
It's actually, what I'm suggesting is that it be student driven. It's not anybody. It's student driven, right? It's the school's purview, as you said. And so I'm suggesting that the students are celebrating what they wish to celebrate, and they've put together a really comprehensive list of what they want to celebrate as students. So I think
that I'm
May I s-
outnumbered, just making my point that it'll continue to divide somebody, somewhere, somehow, is my point. I understand, and I think it's great, and I think it's great on the inside. I just don't think it's good on the outside fence. That's just my
May I?
personal.
I wanted to share my reflections just to Joe on the proposal, since we were each taking an opportunity to respond to what was proposed. I'd like to respond just by thanking you, Joe, for really demonstrating that our mission is alive and well. Our vision states that every South Whitby School District student is a lifelong learner who is multiculturally engaged, literate, and an active community member able to meet the challenges of our global society. It doesn't state that they will be someday, that they will be when they leave the schools. It states that every student is. And an active community member, engaged, literate, and able to meet the challenges of our global society, multiculturally engaged. I just can't think of a better way to demonstrate that our students are living into this vision today than by having the ASB bring forward a proposal like this that is so inclusive of so many perspectives. So I just want to applaud the students for their leadership in this. Applaud you, Joe, for inviting their leadership in this. I think that there are aspects of the proposal that might not be my personal preference, but I also really celebrate that student voice is being centered, and it is deeply aligned with our vision of having these students engaged in this way.
Marnie, I echo what you are sharing, and the only other piece I would ask is that I also am cautious of the message it will send to our students by taking down the banner. And I want to keep that at the forefront. My ask would be is if we are asking students to drive what goes up, my ask would be that students also drive what comes down.
I was actually going to point out there's a couple of questions from a representative from USL who has some questions about the Black Lives Matter banner. And so I'd love to hear those questions asked so we can have that discussion.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the conversation of having the kids be involved or students be involved, but we have to remember we're the adults and we're the ones educating them. And so, yes, I appreciate some student involvement. I just think that we need to remember who are the adults here and who's educating the kids. It's not the students educating us, it's we are to educate them. So let's kind of remember that as we go forward.
I just want to offer that I feel like part of teaching as an educator for 25 years, a big part of my job as an educator is learning from my kids. So I just want that on the record, please.
I would also second that, Damien, earlier you said that you like to let people with expertise speak their expertise. And also as an educator and a school administrator, students learn best when they get to determine have voice and choice in their education and in what their community looks like. And when we drive it, that's when they stop being engaged. And so I think this is an absolute wonderful depiction of citizenship. It's a depiction of leadership among students. It's a depiction of communication and social emotional awareness.
You almost make me want to ask, Andrea, what's your role in being a teacher, an educator? If the students are going to do the education.
You are a coach and a mentor and a guide in learning. You
Well,
follow
exactly,
standards
that's
and
my point.
expectations that students need to meet, and you help students meet that, and you help them cross barriers across all of that.
Exactly.
You look at where they come at the table, and you help them grow. When I get eighth graders who come in completely illiterate, literally do not even know their letters, it is not the curriculum that gets them motivated.
At what age do they not know their
topics.
letters? See, because I will say I had a little bit of an issue here earlier too. I mean, when you were spouting off the systemic stuff and the issues with the children of ethnicity being behind, and I'm looking at that
They are
and saying, that's our
statistically behind
educating
in every
system.
single assessment you look at.
But
Damien.
it comes from our educators. Our educators are the ones that are leaving those children behind.
It comes from
what
assessments. It comes from curriculum.
It's the issue
Jamie,
becomes,
I have
why are they
3
being
bachelor's
left
degrees in
behind?
this. I'm not going to debate you on it.
And I'm not going to debate you either, but they are being left behind by our own education system, which you are part of.
Which
So
is why we address the gaps in our system.
Which is why
Excuse
we're
me,
here.
I don't have a gavel, but if I had one, I'd be banging it right now. We have gotten far off topic, and this conversation does not seem to be conducive towards coming to any statement from the board entire or a majority of the board as to Dr. Moshe's question on proposal to us or notification to us of her intentions. I would like to redirect us to that. To Ann's earlier comment, I will go in and mention Jackson Murphy from Clinton asked, would it be possible to add banners instead of replacing the Black Lives Matter sign? That was the question that Anne asked. I will add a few more public comments here to the discussion, and then we can refocus on the discussion of what Dr. Moshe has brought before us rather than getting into a debate on systemic racism. Thank you. Actually, I can't read these comments at the moment because I do not have a full name or a location on the other 2 comments from the same user. But we do have Jackson's comment there. And Barry, if you could add your full name and location, I will read your comments. But I do want to note, since everyone else has weighed in thus far, I agree that putting this out there demonstrates our resolve. Putting banners on the fence demonstrates our desire to embody and live our mission, vision, and goal statement. It is a statement out there affirming members of our schools, affirming scholars, affirming staff members who are members of these marginalized communities or who identify with one of these specific notes that the scholars have picked out. And I think that that's a really valuable thing that we can do to show our support for these people, because we're not saying that people matter less because they aren't included on this. We're highlighting people who have been marginalized. We're highlighting people who can use some of that highlight, who can appreciate being seen and being heard and being recognized. I'm going to check here. I think, okay, I do have Barry Farley in Clinton. The first comment is, thank you, Damien. Our public schools need to be neutral zones. And yes, Joe, you must listen to the board, but they are predominantly progressive extremists. Obviously, adults need to lead. And he also says, no banners, stay neutral. And thank you for weighing in on the conversation. We do listen to statements that come in from the community, and whether we agree with them or not.
So,
Yeah.
Brooke, at this time, are you looking for the board to give clear direction to the superintendent on this proposal?
I would actually say that the 5 members of the board have all weighed in on their opinions. Do the other board members agree with me on that? Have you had an opportunity to weigh in?
I'd like to just offer a expression of gratitude for Anne's suggestion that student voice be considered in the taking down of and the putting up of banners, with consideration for the fact that we don't need to have 13 or 15 banners up at any given time. So I would just ask that the superintendent consider student participation in that discernment process.
Well, and I'll give credit to Jackson Murphy for that, because I was reading ahead in the questions and I noticed that he made that point. So so thank you to him for being that initial voice.
Right. And we have heard expressions of gratitude from students in our community who feel that the district recognizes that their lives matter. And so I do worry about the impact on student well-being if that sign is removed without process.
Again, I am hoping, actually, I know that our students are wanting to help recognize all students. And I was not suggesting removing any banners. I was suggesting that we would be celebrating by being more inclusive. So that would be the goal. And somebody indicated it's, again, there are banners on that fence all the time. Banners about teacher appreciation, banners that recognize our outstanding student athletes, and banners that recognize the school's vision and mission around equity for our students and the recognition that we have BIPOC students who matter. So I don't think it's too many banners. I think our students matter, and recognizing that we have BIPOC students who have felt marginalized in our district, in our community, who have come forward to say that time and time again. And it started with our board representative several years ago, and she would not be opposed to me using her name, but Katie Rose Jordan was the first student to step forward on the board and say that she felt marginalized, and explained to the board, and Damien, you were on the board at the time, and the entire board was moved by that conversation and started us down the road of talking about equity. So this is not new. It is not something the district just started engaging in. And so we are in a process here that will never stop. That's just the way it goes. We are in finding our way through something that is critical to our students. And I do want to remind everybody that we are on the cusp of graduation, and we should be celebrating our seniors. And we have many of them. And if you take a look at Facebook, there's a video that celebrates our seniors, you know, going to Stanford, going on to Yale, going on to trade schools, going into the military, students who are able to make those choices because of the educators in our district who work with them. But we also recognize that some students face barriers, and it's not for lack of educators trying to reach them. So I just want to say that I have really appreciated working with all of our staff. And this year, more than any other year since I've been here, they've demonstrated the commitment through the most difficult of times. So the fact that we have graduates on our stage on Saturday that we're going to celebrate, I think we need to remember that too. Again, we're all in this business and having these conversations because we believe in our kids and working with our students in our community. There is nobody here, no matter which side of the political divide, that doesn't believe that. So I just want us to take a breath, recognize our passions. I appreciate all of it. I have passion too. And just get back to, we're here for our kids. That's why we're doing this, not doing it for anybody else. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moshe.
Thank you.
And thank
Dr.
you, grads. Congrats, grads. Thanks for bringing us back to that really tremendous reason to celebrate.
Since this is a board workshop and we do invite community comment on this topic, I want to read the ones that we have in the queue now, and then I believe that you have the input that you need, Dr. Moshe, and we can move forward in the agenda. But given that this is a workshop and it is the time when we invite public comment, I do want to read the 4 here. Stina Wenzek, why so many banners? Seems odd. Our school is no longer focused on education. It seems like it's all about the level of melanin in our skin. Sad. Paul Rempa, given that banners rally behind it or against certain groups, it would be best if we remove all banners. How about getting behind all students regardless of color or sex? Amanda Murphy, in case any of you are unaware, USL and about 30 other youth were on a Zoom meeting today when a youth who had not been invited started yelling, "I hate N-words," and yelling the N-word until the kids could get him off. That is why we need a sign that says Black Lives Matter, Damien. Maggie Natras, Langley, it is important to recognize the significance for keeping the banner up. It is crucial to students to see that they do have a place at South Woodby and that board members stand with them. Okay, thank you all for sharing your opinions. We do appreciate hearing from the community, and we do welcome that participation in this conversation. At this point, we're going to move on to, we have a brief policy review, which I believe is simply changing, updating language. It's not actually changing anything. Andrea, if you want to step up on that.
Nope, you are correct. So for policy number 3520, students, fines, fees, and charges, all we're doing is changing the language to include parents and guardians. And using gender neutral language, such as their and they. That are the only changes to it.
Okay. Thank you. I love that we're able to keep updating these. Thank you for your attention on that one, Andrea. But are there any questions or comments on that? I don't presume so. Okay, then we are at the end of our workshop. In just a moment, I will adjourn the workshop. We will call a special business meeting to order. We have one approval of an out of field teaching position that we need to get approved so we can move forward on that. And then I will adjourn the special business meeting and move into executive session. So thank you all for coming and participating. I now adjourn this workshop meeting. And now I call to order the special business meeting of the South Woodby School District. We have one item of new business. That is an out of field notice for 2 members of our staff.
Move to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
It is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion to be had? No discussion to be had. All those in favor of approving this out of field notice, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The out of field notice has been approved. Thank you. And now I will adjourn our special business meeting. We will move into executive session for no more than an hour and a half. This is on review of negotiations and the performance of an employee.
Hey,
Thank
did
you
we
all
get
for
an
attending.
email on that one, Brooke?
What's that?
Did we get an email on that link?
Christy, can you resend the email?
Yes,
For
please
us,
do. I
and-
don't know that I have it either.
Brooke, just a reminder, there will be no business when you return from executive session.
Correct. Yeah, we are done with our special business meeting. We are done with our board workshop. Both have been adjourned. We will now move into executive session. Thank you all for attending. Have a good evening.